This is the Marketing Agency Power Hour, and I'm your host, Cal Wilder. Each week, we'll power through discussions on business challenges, success stories, and game-changing strategies. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, provider of bookkeeping and accounting for marketing agencies. Let's get started. So I'm excited to speaking to today's guest. She's an entrepreneur, a seasoned marketer, an author, and also a podcast host. With over 15 years of professional experience in marketing and strategic branding, she's a published author of a book called The Data-Driven Personalization that I'm sure we'll be talking about today. She co-hosts the popular Social Pros marketing podcast. She's been recognized in top ranks, top 25 B2B marketers and top 35 content marketers lists. She's the founder and president of Media Volery. Zontee Hou, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Happy to be here.
So I'm really excited speaking with you today.
Looking forward to it.
So I always ask guests my first big question, which is, what is the single most powerful strategy for success in your marketing agency these days?
Yeah, I think that this really depends on your definition of success. And in our case right now, our definition of success is great work-life balance for myself and my team. It is really about a great experience for our clients and being able to produce really quality work where we feel that we are able to really drive forward the strategy and the impact of marketing teams. And so with all of that in mind, I would say that the single strategy that's most important to us is to determine the fit between us and our clients. We are relatively picky about who we work with, the size of the organization, the maturity of the organization, and the capabilities of the organization. And, in a day and age when it's easy to get caught up in, we've just got to take all of the work that we can get, I think it's easy to lose sight of the fact that keeping customers is much easier and more cost effective than churning customers, right? Churning clients. And so in order to avoid churn, we really focus on selecting clients to work with that we believe we are going to have the best impact for and be able to do the best work for. And what I mean by that is that as a marketing strategy firm that's really focused on a data-driven approach and a very pragmatic business approach, we want to work with teams that are not necessarily large. In fact, many of our teams, even for larger brands that you may be familiar with, like AARP, the teams themselves might be on the smaller side. They might be somewhat resource constrained, but they are truly interested in using marketing as part of their overall strategic approach. And they have a firm understanding of the importance of metrics, measurement, as well as a desire to really work closely with us to implement the strategies that we put into place. I think that that's really important because, I've worked with organizations of all shapes and sizes. I've been in the marketing space for a long time. I've worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, including brands like Bentley Motors, Allstate Insurance, P.F. Chang's, etc. And in working with all of these different kinds of organizations, sometimes you go to an organization and say, these are the things that we've diagnosed as you needing to change in order to be effective in marketing. And they go, that's great, but we just don't want to put the effort towards any of those things. So can we do an entirely different set of things? And as a strategic advising firm, it doesn't make sense for us to spend time with organizations who don't want to take that guidance in order to do good work. And so I think it's really important to vet your clients up front, to have some frank and honest conversations up front to really understand what it is that they actually want to achieve. What are they capable of? What do they have the internal political will to drive forward? Once you sort of understand that landscape, you can identify the clients for whom you're going to be a really good fit, who they really get what it is that you are going to be able to offer them and believe that you're going to be the best partner. I believe that this really builds trust with the clients up front, and it also allows you to, again, have clients who are going to be with you long term. Every single one of the clients that we are working with right now on retainer has been with us for at least 3 years, some of them more than 15 years. So, it really is about building that kind of fit where they feel like they're going to stick around long term because they want you to help them build that long term success.
I think it's great you pointed out that keeping an existing client is a lot less expensive than trying to bring on a new client to replace a churning client. And I think that's something sometimes we lose sight of. But if you start to measure the cost of bringing on a new client, it's really high.
Everybody knows that you can spend a lot of money on sales, and in the agency space and in any kind of a B2B service, the sales cycle is really long. So, of course, it's going to take you a really long time to build that relationship. But we have found that when we have a really great fit with clients, they are also a great source of word of mouth. We are more likely to get a referral of high quality from an existing client than from an outside source. And we know that when a client comes in who has been referred by somebody in our network, they are very likely to convert. So I think that this really attacks our approach on both sides, right? We're both trying to keep our best clients and make sure that they are sticking around a long time, and we're trying to identify our best leads in the same way.
I love how that you're like tackling in qualitative terms what I would measure in quantitative terms as an accountant or a CFO, right? Like, what's the lifetime value of a client? What's the cost of bringing on a new client? Um, and what what's the value of the referrals you get from a long-term client versus some new client that doesn't have any sense to give you any referrals. So you're quantitatively describing all the financial value of long-term client relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that I definitely think about a lot. You mentioned my book earlier in data driven personalization. One of the reasons that I talk about the importance of building a data driven strategy in marketing is because for most marketers, we actually, our most important role is to impact customer lifetime value. Of course, we can get more customers, but ideally, we also want to increase the value of every customer we have. And that is something that sometimes marketers lose sight of because we get really sucked into the tactical measurement of channels or campaigns, but channels and campaigns don't really level up to those business goals of what marketing can actually really impact. And I believe that customer lifetime value is one of those metrics that we really need to think about more in terms of our marketing approach, because it actually allows us to diagnose some of the different places where we can have a real impact.
So it's relatively easy to manage new leads and conversion rates and initial annual contract value, right? That's easy to measure. It looks like, oh, we're doing a great job marketing. We're generating a bunch of leads. We're converting them. And here's how much they're signing up for. But it's a lot harder to measure, how long the client's been with us and to what extent the marketing function has contributed to that lifetime value, right? So how do you help clients kind of bridge that gap between just kind of focusing on short-term lead gen and conversion versus lifetime value?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the things that we really focus on is segmentation, right? How do we identify our best customers? What makes for those best customers? How do we actually segment those out and look at the marketing that we do with those customers and measure the impact of that, right? If we know certain people have a high propensity to purchase more frequently from our client's brand, we might be running more campaigns to those people and seeing, do those campaigns then increase the propensity to spend from those people? We might be looking at the size of the basket. How much are they spending in terms of goods or services with us in any given time period? How can marketing impact that through different levers, whether that's educating them more about the products or services or giving them a certain very timely messages? I'm sure we've all experienced that thing where you go into, say, a basket online and you buy something and then they're like 5 minutes, you can have this other additional thing for this small additional cost, right? Those kinds of different marketing levers are often delivered to people, but it doesn't need to be delivered to every single one of your customers because, in fact, for those low propensity customers, sometimes that's actually really detrimental to their brand experience, right? And so I think marketers.
Right, I'm gonna unsubscribe. If I feel like I'm being harassed, I'm just gonna unsubscribe.
Exactly, exactly. So really knowing who are your different customers and how they behave and how they value your brand is really important. So that's something that we look at both from a metrics point of view as well as a a marketing impact point of view, right? So we're looking at all of these different ways that people spend. And the other thing that I think is helpful for marketers to think about is, okay, so we can impact how they purchase and how often they purchase, but are we also impacting their, um, let's say, sensibility about our brand? Not just brand loyalty or brand sentiment, but really how do they think about the brand in terms of the fit within their lives? And that actually takes a lot of survey work. So there is a certain amount of qualitative data that we actually want to take in on a regular basis and benchmark over time, so that we can understand how our customers perceive the value that we add. Because for a high value customer and for a casual customer, you want both of them to feel good about your brand, but you actually want them to most likely feel good about different things, because the things that they're going to identify are going to be different. And so if we can impact that perception of the brand, we can actually also increase things like word of mouth. And as we talked about before, word of mouth is not only really important for increasing your overall leads base, but it's also really helpful for shortening your sales cycle, right? People who are referred by other people convert at a faster rate because there is a certain amount of trust already built in. So if we can also make it so that people have something to talk about and they have a desire to talk about your brand or service, then we are also shortening that lead cycle. So those are the couple of different areas that we actually start to measure against in terms of marketing impact. The thing that I see a lot is that a lot of marketers don't realize that these are metrics that they really need to own. And so I think that that's actually a really big opportunity to be more strategic in terms of the role of your marketing team and how you sell that to the rest of your organization so that there is clarity. I mean, Cal, you were talking before from your point of view from the CFO table, and some of the strongest CMOs that I know have really great relationships with their CFOs because they are trying to translate the work of marketing into those hard numbers, and they are looking for the places where they can work with their CFOs, their head of sales, et cetera, to connect all of the dots throughout the customer journey, because that's something that a lot of people struggle with in their organizations. But it's really important because it does help us to tell a holistic story about the work that we're doing.
So you've spoken a lot about like what I would actually put in the bucket of qualitative perspectives from customers, but trying to measure those, right? And so it's very easy to measure leads and conversion rates and annual contract values that get signed at conversion. It would strike me as a lot harder to measure the softer, like perception of value, likeliness to refer. And I mean, net promoter score is nice, but it doesn't necessarily correlate into a lot of things, right? And so, how do you go about measuring some of the quote unquote soft metrics and get those into numbers that can be used?
Sure. I think that we are actually at a really great moment for this particular kind of work right now because AI makes it easier for us to very quickly and very accurately measure certain kinds of sentiment information, because you can now actually have um, focus groups at scale. Our friends at a company called Converge out of Phoenix, Arizona, they actually have an online platform that allows you to have, dozens, even hundreds of people in essentially a virtual focus group to answer questions in real time. And then their AI powered tools are actually not only analyzing the sentiment, but allowing you to collect the data of how many people talked about each different theme, how many of those people felt positively or negatively about those different themes, in free form questions, how many people mentioned different ideas or different key attributes. And so it allows you to really do a lot of this work more easily. I even gave an example in a recent workshop that I ran for my friends at Content Marketing World, where I said that, at a conference like that one, you'll often see brands hosting luncheons or a coffee hour or something like that, a round table with groups of folks, and they might bring in their best clients. What if you put a set of listening devices, recording devices in front of those audiences as you went through a variety of questions about the kinds of things that you would ask them about anyway, right? Again, things like the sentiment, their perception of value, the things that they like, the things that they don't like, the things that they think you got right, the things that you got wrong. If you did all of that work, but you had the ability to record it, then you can put that into an AI tool, get that transcribed, and again, analyzed, get a count of all of the different areas. And again, this is something that you can then benchmark against over time. So yes, it is qualitative, but we can look from a delta perspective, right? What's the change over time as we introduce different kinds of marketing, as we introduce different kinds of features? What are people actually noticing about our brand or our products or services? What are the things that they naturally tend to bring up? And, again, how are we impacting that through the marketing that we're doing? So it gives us the ability to be a little bit more um, data driven and more quantitative about those softer feelings. I think the other thing that you absolutely have to do is to look at how can survey instruments support this, right? So we can't all go running focus groups all of the time. There's just not enough time, and you may not have all of the resources. But again, doing certain kinds of benchmarking surveys over time can be really valuable. It gives you just a longitudinal view of what's happening with your brand. And survey instruments can also be formulated in such a way that it allows you to better understand where people getting information. Now, we've all seen those surveys at the end of a purchase or something like that, where it says, where did you learn about us? And it gives you a list. The problem with those is that they're almost always single selection options, right?
Right. And you normally have multiple to choose from. Yes.
Exactly. And most of us, we don't buy from the first touch. It's not like I saw an ad one time and I go, you know what, that's the thing for me, right? Most of the time you go, oh, that ad was interesting. Now I looked at their website. Maybe I signed up for a coupon. Maybe I learned about them a little bit more. If it's a business to business organization, maybe I'm downloading a white paper. I'm going to a webinar. I'm speaking to a salesperson. There's going to be multiple touch points, right? So we have to look at the way we are actually putting these survey instruments into the field to reflect the actual experience of our customers and to make it simple for them to answer. Now, what I often recommend to people is take this in a very progressive approach, right? Meaning we ask one question at a time at each of these different touch points that doesn't require our customer to go super deep, but does allow them to give us a little bit of nuance. And that's important because you don't want to overwhelm your customer. You don't want to go, thanks for your purchase, answer 10 questions about why you bought. But you can ask one question that has a little bit more ability to get at some of the information. What was the most important touch point that really put you over the edge?
So I have a question. A lot of these are all these that ever I've done, they're all text-based. I have to like type in stuff and like that's a pain in the neck. Is there anybody who's asking you to record an answer and then parsing the audio?
I not yet, but I love that idea. I think that that is a fantastic idea because it would actually make the job of the customer much easier and you'd get more detailed and robust responses. So I love that. Somebody should definitely do it after listening to this podcast.
When I speak with agency owners about AI, usually it's about how do we produce content more effectively and efficiently. Right. What you're talking about is how do we capture and parse and understand client perception data more efficiently and accurately? And I think that's another incredible angle that AI can be implemented for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big chunk of what I talk about in the book, but I also talk about how the tools themselves can actually help marketers who are not necessarily data analysts to process their data more efficiently, right? So now you have qualitative data, you have quantitative data, you hopefully have segmentation data. Hopefully you can put all of these things into a data lake or a data warehouse where, they can be connected together. And then with an AI layer, you can start to ask it, okay, of my best segment, which is, I don't know, persona A, what are the channels that they are most likely to hit based on what we've seen, both behaviorally and also in terms of self-reporting, right? What are the places that they seem to spend the most time? What are the things that they identify as those um, conversion points that actually make them kind of go over the edge and decide, yes, this is the moment to buy, right? You can start to actually look at this different information in a way that informs your marketing decisions. And that's something that I'm really excited to see more people implement as we do realize the value of AI on top of our data layers.
So we've gotten kind of deep in what you do, but I'm curious, what kind of clients you work with, and when they engage with you, what do they expect to get from your firm?
Yeah, for sure. So at Media Volery, we are working with mostly professional services firms as well as luxury consumer goods and nonprofit organizations. The things that we say kind of unite all of our clients is that they have long lead cycles where they really need to build trust with their audiences, right? You're not purchasing a $6,000 brooch without really feeling like the jeweler that you're going to is trustworthy, just like you're not purchasing a new, manufacturing tool without really trusting that those folks are the best in class for that kind of manufacturing. And that's the kind of range of the clients that we work with. Um, like I said, I've had the pleasure of working with Fortune 500 companies for a really long time, but now I'm glad to be working with companies of a variety of different sizes because I think that it allows us to really get into the weeds with folks and really have impact on their business.
Yeah, so now I can appreciate a little bit more all the work that goes into assessing customer perception, because you're trying to work with clients and they need trust. They're selling big ticket items or trusted relationships in the professional services space. You need the end customer to trust their service provider.
Absolutely. And as we were talking about before, churn is a big factor for these kinds of businesses, right? It is much easier and much better for an engineering firm to work with the same couple of property managers throughout the year than it is for them to try to find many, many different real estate groups to work with, right? You're just going to have a much simpler kind of relationship when you're doing multiple projects for a particular client in that kind of situation. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. Similar with our travel clients, it's easier to have somebody book a cruise 4 times a year than to find 4 separate people who want to book cruises. So whenever we're thinking about that, we are thinking about how do we help them build those relationships that are valued, that are perceived to be really trustworthy, and also, again, likely to be the kinds of relationships where if they feel good about it, they're going to spread the word to other people like them.
So you seem to have a very well developed and fine tuned approach to who you want to work with and how you help them. I'm curious, kind of how long you've been in business at your current firm, and how long it took you to develop this fine tuned approach.
Media Volery has been around since 2014, so a little while now, and I've been on my own since 2013, and so it is something that we have definitely taken a number of years to really develop. I think that over time you realize which clients you really like to work with, which clients you find aren't necessarily the right fit. Like I said, we have worked with some clients in the e-commerce space who are, selling lower ticket goods. We're not the best fit for that particular kind of work. I think that the things that we really enjoy happen to be more in the professional services space, more in the nonprofit space, more in that kind of luxury high ticket good space, because we find that those have more similarities with each other. And so it's easier for us to build a team around those things, right? Even if an architect is working with both residential and commercial clients, those residential clients are going to have a lot more in common with the kinds of clients that we see for an engineering firm or a manufacturing company's clients than, again, with somebody who's, let's say, buying lipstick.
When you start out, start your own business, trying to get off the ground, there's this temptation to try to work with everybody and, let's get some references and leverage them. But how do you break that gap from, like, initially you have this temptation to try to work with everybody to where you are now, where you have like a finely honed system and you know who you can be successful with and who you can and what you should charge and what kind of expectations you can set with them? Like, how do you go from like starting a business and being somewhat desperate for work maybe to where you are now?
I think that you have to start with recognizing what makes you successful in your work. So for me, it is people who really value a strategic and thoughtful process, who understand that the results are not going to come on day one, but rather we actually have to build towards success, and who are willing to work with me to get there. And I think that's definitely been true on day one. If I speak to somebody and they're like, what I really want is results in the first 30 days, I'm like, listen, between you and me, I've taken a look at your various marketing sites and materials, etc., and you don't have what it takes right now for me to make you successful in 30 days because there's a lot of work that it will take to get there, right? I could run you the best performance campaign on earth and send you a ton of traffic, but if your website's not there, if your language is not there, your assets are not there, your team is not there, you can't convert those anyway. So if you come in the door with that kind of attitude, we're not going to be successful. And I think I'm really honest with people about what is the approach that I take. And I think that over time, what I've learned is what are the signals of success for that relationship with myself and the clients. So, I will have clients come in and say, I think you guys are the ones. We really love the kind of work you do, but we'll start talking about their goals, their approach, their resources, their desire for change, and we'll pretty quickly recognize where there's going to be barriers. And I will tell them honestly, these are the things that I think are going to foil us and keep us from being successful together. If it is that we can align on them, then wonderful. But if not, then I'm more than happy to refer people to other partners. I'd rather those people be happy and to have good relationships with me and to have them come in and again have a wasted couple of months with them and then they move on and they're really unhappy, right? This is about my reputation, my firm's reputation as well. So I think that the temptation at the beginning of saying yes to everything can really bite you if you're not careful, because you can end up taking a lot of work that you are not going to be successful at. And again, I think that ultimately my approach is always a conservative one of how do we make sure that this is the right fit for the long term.
So tell me more about the book. You published it last year. It's called Data-Driven Personalization: How to Use Consumer Insights to Generate Customer Loyalty. So what's that book all about?
Yeah, so data-driven personalization is really about building a data-driven strategy. It's a book for marketing leaders and business leaders who understand that there's an opportunity now more than ever because of tools like AI that make it cheaper than ever to process the data to win a competitive advantage over their competitive landscape because they know their customers better than the next guy. And in this moment, what that's going to require is for marketing leaders and business leaders to find a way to bring together the right players within their organization to unite the data in such a way that it can be useful for some of the things that we talked about earlier, like segmentation, like customer insights, like ongoing customer journey work, like identifying the different channels and messaging that really truly resonate with your customers based on things like their attitudes, their motivations, their behaviors. And I think that we're in a really exciting time. And so for me, it was really fun to write the book because I've been doing this work for nearly 20 years now. And I have worked with so many different organizations of different sizes and shapes. And some of the businesses that are doing the most interesting things with data are not necessarily the largest, right? I include some small business examples in the book of companies who are doing just great work in terms of what I would call relatively straightforward digital marketing, email marketing, social media types of campaign, personalization on their website that are really driven by what they know about their customers. And because of the work that they've done to be really thoughtful about the data that they collect, they are more successful than their competitors. And I think that this is something that we can all learn from. And I hope that as people pick up the book, they recognize that it's not just a book for people who already have the data. In fact, I would say it's really for people who recognize that they need to make the case, the business case, to invest in data within their organizations. And I hope that the book gives you the tools to tell that story to your executive team of why you need to invest in the data. Because if you don't do it now, then you will become extremely behind in the next 5-10 years because the technology is just running away.
So if I run, say I run a professional services business doing a few $1,000,000 a year in revenue, and I want to capture customer data and customer insights, like tell me some stories or example of how to actually go about doing that in a way that's going to give me data I can use to then kind of move the needle?
Sure. So I'll share with you one of the small business examples that I have in the book, which is a company called Methodical Coffee. They're out of South Carolina, and they are a coffee roaster that does really beautiful, lovely roast of all different kinds. They have coffee shops that you can go into, but they also have a pretty robust mail order and online business.
So on the surface, this is a very simple business. They take coffee beans, they roast them, they sell them, right?
Yeah, pretty straightforward. What they've gotten really good at, though, is putting some relatively simple segmentation in front of their audiences. They let their audience actually identify themselves. Which one of these buyers are you? Are you somebody who is really a coffee nerd and really wants to get into the nitty gritty of the different kinds of beans and their stories and the way that they're roasted? Are you somebody who loves coffee, but it just wants to be kind of guided and given some nice options that make you feel a little bit more elevated, but are not going to challenge you? Are you somebody who wants to be a great gifter? You're not necessarily drinking the coffee, but you want to be really perceived by other people as somebody who's given a great gift, right? There are different audiences that are most likely that they recognize are the most likely customers and the ones who are going to spend the most money with them. And they just ask their customers essentially, like, which of these buckets are you? And folks start to select their buckets. Now, once they're in the bucket, right, they get sent different kinds of content. And that content does some of the things that I mentioned earlier of progressive profiling. It puts different options in front of them so that they can better segment you within that bigger segment. They can start to see, okay, this is a person who wants to be guided, but they only wanted to be guided occasionally. This is a person who wants to be guided, but they actually like to consume a decent amount of content because even though they are not sophisticated, they love the idea of coffee and community. This is somebody who comes into the store occasionally. This is somebody who does not, right? Like, and it starts to allow them to understand the different likely scenarios, and therefore they can do more targeted messaging and offers to those different people. I think that what they've identified, and again, this is very common in the different businesses that I mentioned in the book, is that collecting data is not a one-shot thing. It's an ongoing process of making sure that you're giving your customers opportunities to tell you a little bit about themselves, even when they don't realize that they are telling you about themselves. And how they do that is, again, using certain kinds of messages and cues where it might be, here's two different guides that you can select. Based on the guide you select, they can now make an assumption about which of these things you value more. And they're going to test more things within that particular bucket than the other bucket. And so they can start to see what resonates with you. Now, if you start to click on more of their messages in that bucket, they'll go, okay, yes, this was validated and this person is within this category. But if you don't click on those things, they might actually try something else against you, right? And this is not necessarily sophisticated, complicated levels of marketing automation. This is, again, pretty straightforward, but it allows you to do some very interesting stuff in terms of getting more specific with your customers about what they care about.
So I could see how that may work in selling coffee beans or physical products. Could you explain how you could implement the similar approach with more professional services business?
Sure. So this is actually something that I talked about with a client of mine a couple of years ago. They are a large financial services brand, and one of the things that we recognized was that they had a lot of data about their customers, and some of these were big institutional types of customers, as well as family offices, things like this. They had a decent amount of information about them, but they didn't really do any kind of segmentation in terms of the marketing messaging or the content that they were actually providing these different audiences. And in fact, within those different organizations, they didn't do a great job of actually identifying what are the individual roles within that organization that they were really speaking to. And so that became a place where we identified that there were some real opportunities to do more targeted content marketing that was really aimed at these different specific audience segments. And not only did we want to do it through marketing channels of delivering this more specific, more high value, trust building content marketing to those different segments. Again, different kinds of managers, different kinds of let's call it influencers like a financial advisor, as well as, again, institutional decision makers, right? Again, all very, very different in terms of their needs and their objectives. But we also gave these tools to their sales teams to actually implement into their ongoing sales check-ins. And we asked the sales teams to start collecting back information um, in terms of how those different audiences engaged. They would ask, "Oh, we sent you a guide on XYZ last week. Just wanted to see if you had a chance to look at it." And you would start to notice the folks who engaged with content versus didn't engage with the content, and that would also give them additional feedback. They would also be asking questions about, what kind of things would be most useful to them, right? So for certain audiences, then we were able to refine. Did they want things that were more workshop or toolkit oriented? Did they want things that were easy to digest, like podcasts? How was the performance of certain kinds of video assets? And that actually started to allow them to be more efficient as well. Because prior to that, they were doing a lot of these really big ebooks or white papers where they would do this big kind of splashy announcement of it, run a bunch of advertising, but then the content never necessarily got disseminated to the right audiences who would actually use them or care about them. And by taking this large asset and breaking it into many different versions of it in different formats that were more relevant, and then doing more measurement against what was actually getting used by which ones of these target audiences, they were able to find some real insights in terms of what was actually going to be valuable for their content team. Now, this was really sitting only in the content team, so I can't speak to the advertising piece of it. But I think that that's an example where, again, from a professional services point of view, um, you put so much energy into the creation of these things that if you do not build into them this element of the segmentation, the personalization, and the feedback mechanism, you really don't get the most value out of it because you just kind of put it out into the world and go, well, we got some clicks. These are the places we got some clicks.
Yeah, no, I interestingly, if I think back to my own experience, I think about, I'm in the bookkeeping, accounting, tax, and CFO space, and, we capture some data, from the visitors' travels through our website, what they clicked on and submitted and downloaded and stuff, which is nice. And so sometimes I see somebody, you know, clicked or downloaded something about, getting your taxes filed on time. So, okay, that's interesting. And then sometimes I see people who clicked on that, but they also clicked on download a copy of my financial operating system book. They clicked on the top 5 profit drivers for professional services firm. So I can kind of see they're like giving a lot of thought to strategic financial operations, not just getting their taxes filed on time. Um, and so that's all nice information to have if you but then it's like, "Oh, well, how do we thoughtfully reach out to them?" And it doesn't seem like we're, like, stalking them. Uh, but it gives us that information about, what do they actually care about based on what they're looking at and downloading from our website.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, I think it does allow you to ask follow-up questions that are then more highly relevant to the kinds of issues that they're more likely to have. One of the things that I think is really interesting is my friends at a company called Netline. They are a content delivery company that they actually have a ton of data about different audiences, most particularly in the professional services space. So I think they really make their money by people serving their content through their network and them essentially advertising those different resources. They're mostly things like ebooks, worksheets, things like that, to audiences that are appropriate. And they serve content on sites like Fortune, Forbes, et cetera, right? So because they already know who it is that you are trying to target, you can go into their system and target people by, um, professional services in these industries, this size of company, et cetera, et cetera. Um, the data that they actually provide back to you is not only who ended up downloading um, your resources that you put on their platform, but it can even be what are the other resources that those people are tending to look at. And in fact, one of the examples that they gave to me that I don't think we shared in the book, but is in the companion podcast, which is called Data Driven Decisions. Um, they talked about how that was actually a tool that some of their clients even use to mitigate churn. Because again, if they start to see people search for resources around topics that they actually offer services around, but it's an existing client, then they can actually go to that client and say, hey, wanted to talk about your current services. Did you know that we actually provide X, Y, and Z in addition to the things that we already do with you? And that can allow them to build that relationship more and grow that account, right? Rather than losing that account to somebody else who is providing those services. And I think it's a great example of how, again, companies of all different sizes actually in the time that we're in now have access to useful, valuable data about their customers, even if you don't have it right now in your database. There are all of these different additional tools that you can layer onto your ecosystem to allow you to give your team more insights.
So for small businesses that don't have a big data analytics team, do you have any tools or suggestions for how to collate all this data and like put it into one place that's digestible?
Oh my gosh. Well, like I mentioned before, I think that we're actually lucky in a lot of ways that AI is going to get cheaper over time, and there are more and more tools that are being layered onto our various data sets. For instance, uh, Microsoft has made a lot of investments into putting Copilot and some other tools on top of their existing tools, including their database tools. So you can now start to do some natural language querying out of it. One of the tools that I also recommend to folks as just a really baseline one is Notebook LM, which is Google's closed LM tool, right? So you are building a language model with the data and the resources that you put into it. That's actually one that I share in my workshops that I teach, where I actually bring in a bunch of different data sources and we put it into Notebook LM, and it allows us to start querying. Okay, these are our different personas. This is the different data that we have about our customers. These are the different conversations that have been had about our brand, such as customer service queries or social media data, etc. You know, what are the key decision points for, segment A based on the data that we've provided. And you can start to actually use the tool to do some of that parsing. Oh, is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But it does start to get you more information more quickly and gives you a good place to start. Now, again, that requires you to have the data in the first place. You have to have good tracking and intake. But if you have some of that information available to you, then that is one of the places where you can start to do some interesting things. The other thing that I would recommend is if you do not have a lot of data yourself, look into tools like Persado or Optimizely, where they are actually offering the personalization and the optimization on your website through their data sets and their AI tools. In other words, they already have motivational data, attitudinal data, profile data about customers. They can match your customer to their database and then provide the personalization layer on your website in terms of your landing pages, your copy, your calls to action, based on the attitudes and motivations of those people. Now, you don't necessarily have to own the data in order to get the results of that data. That's an inexpensive, relatively inexpensive. I say relatively because none of these tools are cheap per se, but cheaper than necessarily building a brand new database. Way for you to be able to capitalize on that kind of information. So consider it rented data.
So this has all been great. We're spending a ton of time talking about what you can do for clients and make them more successful and everything. I'm curious though, for your own firm, what are your real goals over the next few years, and how do you assess and measure your own performance? What are you trying to call?
I think it goes back to the things that I talked about at the beginning. We really look at our churn rate, we look at the growth within our clients. We have some clients where, we've been working with one team for a while, and then suddenly we have the opportunity to work with other departments or teams within their organization. That's always a good sign of growth. My goal, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not necessarily to grow this business, 10x, right? It is really about sustainable growth that allows me to live a lifestyle that makes me happy and allows me to have a relatively balanced work life experience. I'm the mother of a small child. She's 3. So, it is important to me that I'm available to do things with her as much as I'm available to be responsive to my team.
One of the things that I've kind of learned or observed over the years is in service businesses, staff, they want opportunities for advancement, to get promoted, to make more money. And so if as owners, we're not hell-bent on growth, then it might be hard to produce those growth opportunities for our people. So how do you think about, balancing your own personal objectives as the agency owner with your business, which might be a little more balanced in nature with maybe a staffer who is early in their career and they just want to grow and have all these opportunities, and like maybe you can't give them as many opportunities as fast as they want.
I mean, I think that that's about creating a really great culture. I've been really lucky to have fantastic interns and hires over the years, many of whom have left us for other organizations. But every single one of those people who has left is still somebody that I check in with at least once a year, if not more. And why is that? I think it is because we have built a company where they actually do have a lot of hands on opportunities to learn, to grow, to interface with the clients, to be valued, and we do have a really excellent work-life balance. I have people who've been with my team for 7+ years, and I've had folks on our team who, again, continue to come back to us and say, this was one of the most pivotal, important job opportunities that they've ever had because it allowed them to develop the skills that have allowed them to be successful later in their careers. Um, I don't have to be the place where they spend their entire career. That's not necessarily my goal. In fact, I feel like if you stay with me forever, hopefully that's because you feel like, again, this is actually offering you a work-life balance that makes sense for the moment that you are in. But if you decide to leave us and go somewhere else, then I'm more than supportive of that. And I have been with my team over the years. And I think that is important. I think that, um, every agency is going to have different specific desires and goals from an organizational point of view. But ultimately, I feel like life is too short to say, like we have to be the end all be all for everybody because you're never going to be that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, my father worked at the same company from when he graduated with his, you know, ba- degree from university to when he retired, but that is not how the world works today. And so I like you. I want my people to stay with me forever, but it's not necessarily realistic. So I want them to develop and learn and grow and become the best they can be. And if they eventually need to take their talents someplace else, that's great. Hopefully retain a good relationship with them. Maybe at some point they come back. But if not, maybe they refer other business to us. It's just kind of trying to develop people, and even if they don't directly benefit you, I feel like there's like a karma to the universe. And if you help people, at some point somebody's gonna come back and help you.
For sure.
So I'm curious, we've talked all of this marketing and data-driven client analysis and everything, but my day job is in bookkeeping, accounting, and tax and finance. So I've got to ask a couple of questions about that. How do you go about managing those things in your agency? Like who do you have do the work? How do you oversee it? And what kind of reports do you get or metrics do you look at to stay abreast of how your agency's performing?
Yeah. We have a part-time operations person, and then we work very closely with our accountant to just continuously have an overall assessment of our financial picture. Like I mentioned, because most of our clients are long-term contracts, folks who've been on retainer with us for many years, we don't see a ton of variation, usually month to month. Although we will have projections, of course, in terms of year-over-year growth and some churn, et cetera, et cetera. And those are things that we try to predict and forecast and just prepare for. I would say we have a relatively straightforward financial picture. So luckily, there's not too many surprises in the kind of work that we do. I think that in most marketing organizations, there are, of course, certain kinds of just hard costs and tools and things like that that you need to account for. But otherwise, we keep it pretty simple.
Is there anything you've learned the hard way over the years that you wished you had a do over for?
I think that the biggest learning would probably just be to really keep an eye on cash flow because where you think that you are relatively comfortable, it only takes a couple of cycles with clients who are not on top of their invoices to really make a mess of everything, right? And so, I think just recognizing that, yeah, sometimes you need a much bigger buffer than you even recognize, even if you have a healthy, invoicing. Again, if you see things kind of slip and you're not on top of it, your situations can can get dicey pretty fast.
Yeah, no, that's a very astute comment, Zontee. The difference between cash flow and a reported profit. You could look at like most small business owners just want to look at the P&L, the income statement, and you click the button and QuickBooks gives it to you. It's probably based on the somewhat the accrual basis, based on invoices that were sent out. And but if you haven't received payment for those invoices and somebody gets behind on you, some big client gets into you for a couple months, you might be in a negative cash flow situation, even though your P&L says you made a positive profit. So I think that's very astute in trying to manage the cash flow, not just the P&L.
Yeah, absolutely. That's probably the biggest lesson. Otherwise, I think from a point of view, I think it's really just understanding that all the little things can add up, right? And really understanding where all of your different tools and services actually are. One of the things that you and I spoke about, prior to this call was even how you are using Squadcast for this podcast. And Squadcast is now included in Descript, and that's a great example of a tool that we use, but I've actually never used Squadcast. And it's like if you're already paying for something that has this redundant capability, that's the other thing that I tell people to keep an eye on is what do you actually have in your tool stack lately, and what can you actually eliminate? Because things are actually becoming redundant all the time. We used to have a separate tool just for transcriptions. We used to have a separate tool just for audio recording. And again, all of these things are actually starting to get kind of amalgamated. So if you can pay for fewer things, that's the other thing that I would definitely recommend for people to keep an eye on.
Yeah, agree completely. And, sometimes I use analogy that, costs are kind of like weeds. They're always growing. And if you don't want to get overwhelmed with costs, you've always got to be cutting them and figuring out ways to cut them.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You've obviously accomplished quite a bit. You got a great business going now. I'm curious, Zontee, when you were younger, little Zontee, little girl Zontee, did you think you'd be running and owning and managing your own business one day?
Honestly, yes. I'm going to tell you that the first business that I tried to start, I was 12 and I started a magazine, and I worked with a couple of local friends to write articles and actually print them out on my dad's printer. My poor dad spent probably much too much in ink.
He was heavily invested in your business.
He was heavily in this for sure. But my parents are business owners. They had their own law firm for many, many years, nearly 40 years. And so I think that seeing them work their own hours and really have control of their own fate was something that really impacted me. And so, yes, I did always think that at some point I would own my own business. I didn't know when that might happen, and I didn't know what that would look like in terms of a business, but I'm glad that it came to be, and it's given me the opportunity to work with brands around the world and do a lot of travel and write my book, and it's been a great adventure so far.
What was the key milestone or milestones or catalyst that got you from being, a W-2 employee to striking out on your own?
It's interesting because I don't think that I set out to do it at that point in my life so readily, but what I was for many years a marketing manager within a large company, one of the oldest arts and crafts companies in the US and one of the largest brands in that space. And I really loved building a team there. I had the opportunity to really build up an entire marketing practice across all areas of digital. I mean, this was first wave podcasting, blogs before there was really content marketing, influencer marketing before we had a term for it. So I had a lot of opportunities to do some really fascinating things. And I built a lot of skills in that time, but I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be brand side forever. And so I went back to school. I got my master's at Columbia University. And in that process, um, I started to ask people, what's the next thing that I should be doing? And a friend and mentor of mine asked me if I wanted to join him in his consulting practice, which I was able to do for many years. And that really taught me the power of consulting and the power of um, helping organizations to get an outside view of their marketing practices and how that could actually really transform organizations. And in that work, one of the things that I recognized was that you can give them the strategy, but a lot of companies actually need the hands-on help to execute that work. And that's why I built Media Volery, was because I saw these clients who said, thank you so much for this fantastic strategy, but my team needs more support. We need more resources in order to actually do this work. Otherwise, it'll take us, 10 years to do what you've put on, 50 pages. And one of the things that I recognized was, okay, well, I have the skills and the capability to actually do that execution work, but I would need to build a team in order to actually execute that work. I don't have that bandwidth on my own. And so that's why I started building and growing an agency. And over the years, we've really kept with that promise. We've helped our clients execute those strategies that we've built for them. And that's really been fun and exciting.
Very cool. And you also host your own podcast, right? The Social Pros podcast?
Yeah, so the Social Pros podcast was started by my friend and mentor, Jay Bear, way back in the day.
Jay Bear, I think I saw him speak once, maybe a decade ago at a Intact Accounting Software conference.
That sounds very likely.
He had like a plaid jacket. That's his thing, right?
That's his thing. Yeah, and I think about 12 years ago, Social Pros is a podcast that is focused on the nexus of social media and all other marketing disciplines. We speak to practitioners about how they do best-in-class work, how they think about their team structure, how they think about hiring, how they think about their strategies, how they think about their data, and everything in between. And for us, it really is an opportunity to share with people an inside look at the practices of great marketing organizations.
So, what do you like to do? It sounds like you work a lot, but you must have some time outside of work. What do you like to do outside of work?
Sure. So, my husband and I are really big into the arts. We love museums, we love travel, we love music, we love concerts. And so now, as I mentioned earlier, I have a 3-year-old. We really like to travel with her. We really like to take her to different kinds of museums. We really like to take her to different kinds of performances and just really expose her to all sorts of creativity. We're really lucky that she really loves art as well. So that's fantastic. She has been to everything from the Picasso Museum to the Juan Miro Museum. She's been to the Bourse de Commerce in Paris. She's been to Luxembourg. She's really a well-traveled baby.
Wow, she's going to have a leg up on her classmates when it comes to art and culture and history.
For sure.
That's awesome. And you live in New York City, so you have access to a lot of that stuff, right?
That's right. Yeah, we're extremely lucky. We go to the Brooklyn Museum all of the time, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and many, many different museums in between. And I think certainly New York City is a fantastic arts capital, and we get an opportunity to see a lot of things that come through.
So, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground in this podcast, and we went pretty deep in some areas. And I would encourage you all to check out Zontee's book, Data-Driven Personalization: How to Use Consumer Insights to Generate Customer Loyalty. I think you can appreciate from listening to this interview that she knows what she's talking about and she goes deep and is really good at what she does. So check out that book. And if you want to reach out to her directly, Zontee, what's the best way for people to reach out to you directly?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find because I have a unique name. Or you can visit my website, zonteehou.com.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the time you spent with us and our audience here and everything you've shared. We went deep on some technical topics and you shared a little bit about your career journey, and I really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Cal. It's been a pleasure.
And so for those listening, hopefully you've learned something or at least enjoyed hearing the story of another agency entrepreneur. Please share this this podcast exists. It's 9 months old or so. I'm trying to get it out in the hands of more and more marketing agency owners to help them run healthier agencies themselves. So, this has been another exciting episode of the Marketing Agency Power Hour. We'll see you all next time. Another episode in the books. Thank you so much for tuning in. For show notes and more, please visit marketingagencypowerhour.com. This show is sponsored by SmartBooks, providing marketing agencies with bookkeeping, accounting, and finance support. With SmartBooks, you gain the clarity and confidence to make your agency a success. Until next time.